Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an editorial from page number 6. This editorial evaluates the National Policy for Rare Diseases 2021 that was recently notified by the government. Just the day before yesterday, we spoke about the provisions of this policy in detail. So now, let's look at this editorial which carries out a thorough evaluation of this policy. See, rare diseases are those diseases which occur very infrequently in the given population. These diseases are so rare that there doesn't exist a market for these diseases with regard to research and development, diagnosis and treatment, because a very small percentage of the population suffers from these rare conditions, which are usually a result of genetic disorders and defects. And hence it doesn't motivate the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry to invest heavily in R&D to come out with suitable diagnosis and treatments for these diseases. Hence, the detection and treatment of these diseases becomes very expensive, and hence it becomes unaffordable for anyone irrespective of their social status. These rare diseases are identified on the basis of three markers. This includes the total number of people suffering from the disease, the prevalence of the disease in a given population, and finally, it is also based on the availability or non-availability of treatment options. The World Health Organization defines a rare disease as having a frequency of less than 6.5 to 10 per 10,000 population. That is, in a given population of 10,000 people, hardly around 6.5 to 10 people suffer from this disease. Based on this definition of the WHO, around 7,000 rare diseases have been identified, and this includes inherited cancers, autoimmune disorders, congenital malformations, Hirschsprung's disease, Gaucher disease, cystic fibrosis, muscular dystrophies, and LSD or lysosomal storage disorders. Around the world, around 300 million patients suffer from these rare diseases, and in India alone, there are nearly 70 million patients who are suffering from these rare conditions. For some of these diseases, diagnosis and treatment is available, but however, such treatment is very expensive and cost prohibitive. For many other diseases, there is no treatment and no diagnosis, and this further increases the suffering of these patients. So the editorial argues that for any welfare state, the focus should be on inclusive growth and development, and India, being a state committed to welfare, should ensure that every single citizen is given adequate care and protection, irrespective of how small the target group is. So in this regard, the editorial says that the government of India has made a good start by coming out with this policy because it does contain several positive features. For starters, it provides financial support of up to 20 lakh rupees for one-time treatment of certain identified rare diseases which are categorized under Group 1. It also proposes to organize crowdfunding for these patients by working with NGOs, civil society, donors, charity-based organizations, and philanthropists. It also provides for the establishment of a registry for rare diseases in order to create a detailed database. Then it also proposes to put in place a mechanism for early detection of rare diseases so that timely treatment can be provided to the patients. But however, the policy does have many shortcomings, and the editorial goes on to point out these shortcomings. The first drawback is that serious conditions such as LSD has been categorized under Group 3, thereby denying these patients any financial support from the government. See, for lysosomal storage disorders, treatment is available in the market. There is a definitive treatment that is available, but the costs are very prohibitive. So considering the high cost, the government has categorized the disease under Group 3, thus denying financial support to this disease which has treatment options available. The next drawback is that no funding has been allocated for rare diseases which requires immediate or lifelong treatment, even though these therapies have been approved by the Drug Controller General of India. The reason cited by the government for failing to provide financial support for certain types of rare diseases is that Such funding could become a huge financial burden on the government, and the government will have to strike a balance between financial burden and equitable healthcare. But however, activists and families which are caring for such patients have criticized the government and its approach. And based on accurate calculations, they have pointed out that the center has to spend just around 80 to 100 crore rupees to facilitate the timely treatment of such patients. Critics of the policy have pointed out that by excluding diseases that require lifelong treatment, the government has ignored the most vulnerable group. And if the government's sole concern was about higher cost and financial burden, then it could have worked out an innovative cost sharing model with the state governments. Because the center already has such cost sharing arrangements with few states such as Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Kerala. For certain rare diseases, the high cost of treatment is shared between the center and few state governments, and a similar cost sharing model could have been worked out with all the other states as well. And this would have cemented India's commitment towards the welfare of every single citizen. The editorial concludes by stating that financial support from the government is critical for continuous treatment of those suffering from rare diseases. Now let's take up a column from page number 7 in which the writer takes a stand against racism, and he makes a case for defeating racism in the society by promoting tolerance and by taking strict anti-racist action. See, racism is the targeted discrimination and stereotyping of certain races and ethnic groups based on their skin color, their physical features, and even on the basis of their language, religion, culture, etc. It is usually the minority races and ethnic groups that are at the receiving end of racism and such discrimination and stereotyping due to the intolerance displayed by the majority races and ethnic groups. For example, the stereotyping of Indians and Asians in Western countries is racism. Similarly, the stereotyping of black and brown people by the white population is again racism. The stereotyping of ethnic and religious minorities also constitutes as racism. Even within India, we witness racism, as seen in the case of people from northeast of India who are stereotyped and discriminated against by the people from mainland India. Such display of racial intolerance and discrimination, followed with the stereotyping of the racial minorities, results not only in the violation of their human rights, but it also diminishes their dignity and leads to their harassment in the society. Such violation of human rights and harassment increases inequalities in the society, and it could even lead to targeted violence against these communities. So overall, such racial discrimination affects the health, the well-being, and the opportunities available to racial minorities. And continued discrimination and their stigmatization by the society ends up increasing inequalities in the society. So every year, the 21st of March has been designated as a day to be celebrated as the International Day for Elimination of Racial Discrimination. This provides us an opportunity to explore the nuanced causes and consequences of modern day racism and to renew our commitment to combat racial discrimination. See, today, in a modern civilized world, public attitudes have largely changed, and any open expression of racial ideology is immediately condemned as racism has become less socially acceptable. This is largely due to growing awareness, education, and modernization of our society. But despite this, racism is still very much prevalent in our society because the current forms of racism and discrimination, they are very complex, and quite often modern day racism can be very subtle and covert in nature. Especially with the emergence of internet and social media platforms, intolerance, especially racial intolerance, has been breeding on these platforms because these platforms have provided the cover of anonymity which is being exploited by the racists to continue their discrimination and intolerance towards the racial minorities. For example, when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, internet traffic in the United States to Asian hate websites increased by 200% as the pandemic was believed to be of Chinese origin. Then even look at what happened in India as the pandemic broke out in the country. In the initial days of the pandemic, when a large cluster of cases were discovered at the Tablighi Jamaat congregation, there was an exponential increase in anti-Muslim stereotypes in the country, especially on the internet and social media platforms. Something similar was witnessed in Sri Lanka as well, against racial and ethnic minorities, where deliberate attempts were being made to give a call for social and economic boycott of religious minorities based on fake news, misinformation, and propaganda. In today's world that is driven by technology and artificial intelligence, even techno racism is emerging as a threat. This is nothing but the case where technology becomes racist as well. This is very much possible in the case of AI or artificial intelligence because AI algorithms they learn based on the data that is fed into them. So considering that our society already has several racial stereotypes, the data that is training the AI algorithms will also contain the racial biases and racial stereotypes. And this could make several AI driven technology as well racist. For example, facial recognition softwares could start looking out for people of a particular race or of a particular physical feature, thereby leading to the stigmatization and targeting of certain minority groups. In this context, it's very important to note that the WHO and as well as Lancet they have observed in their latest studies that the ongoing pandemic is going to have a disproportionate impact on racial minorities, especially on women and girls who belong to these minority communities. In this regard, UNESCO has taken up a landmark initiative to combat racism and discrimination. And just a couple of weeks ago, at its headquarters in Paris, it hosted the Global Forum Against Racism and Discrimination in joint partnership with South Korea or the Republic of Korea. During the proceedings of this global forum, the UNESCO and its members have decided to make progress towards the establishment of a global multi-stakeholder partnership on anti-racism. If such a global framework is created with the leadership of UNESCO, it can be very useful in pushing countries to adopt national laws, policies, and programs that are targeted towards racism, and it can help in the promotion and enforcement of anti-racist laws and policies. In fact, the UNESCO has already been contributing to anti-racist initiatives through its education programs, and by focusing on scientific learning and cultural sensitization, the UNESCO has been able to have effective communication and awareness programs that are targeted towards the young people, that is, the school going children and young adults, because UNESCO believes that one of the best ways of combating racism in the society is to transform our young people into the champions of anti racism. Even the International Coalition of Inclusive and Sustainable Cities has created a platform, and this city level platform is functioning as a laboratory for good practices in the fight against racism. So, such concerted efforts are needed to combat racism, especially the subtle and covert methods of racism that is prevalent in our modern day society. The writer concludes by saying that racism cannot be overcome with mere professions of good faith, but instead we need to put in place stringent anti-racist action through laws and policies and through educational awareness initiatives in order to combat racism that is prevalent in our society and in order to promote tolerance towards racial diversity. Now let's take up another column from page number 7. See, right now we are going through an election season wherein multiple states are headed towards elections. And as the election process is ongoing, the model code of conduct is in place in order to keep the political parties and politicians under check so that the elections can be held in a free and fair manner by the Election Commission of India. But however, it is quite normal for the media to report several transgressions of the model code of conduct being committed by political parties and politicians. And the media also reports on the kind of action that the Election Commission of India is taking against these parties and politicians who are breaching the model code of conduct. As per laid down rules and regulations, the ECI would be expected to act in a fair manner and irrespective of the politician involved and irrespective of the party involved, The Election Commission would be expected to take strict action against these transgressors in order to maintain the sanctity of the elections and to uphold the free and fair nature of the elections. But the writer points out, as the media is busy and involved in reporting only on these transgressions, it may be forgetting to check whether the Election Commission of India is acting in a fair manner while punishing these transgressions. He goes on to cite several recent incidents which indicate that probably the Election Commission has been displaying differential treatment towards different parties and different politicians, thereby raising questions over the credibility of the institution itself. So the writer says that while the media is busy reporting on the transgressions of the parties and politicians and the action taken by the Election Commission, it also needs to question whether there are any institutional failures on the part of the Election Commission itself and whether the Election Commission is acting in a fair manner while enforcing this model code of conduct on the parties and the politicians. Now let's look at this interview with Mr. Satinder Lamba on page number 10, which helps us understand the significance of back-channel talks in diplomacy. See, back-channel talks are nothing but informal covert talks between two governments on sensitive issues, and these talks and negotiations are designed to be held away from the glare of the media and the public. See, in diplomacy, on certain sensitive matters, two governments may not be able to talk to each other openly because such talks might attract unnecessary attention from the media and the public. This in turn would end up derailing the talks even before any progress could be achieved. And this especially is very true when it comes to sensitive issues involving two hostile neighbors such as India and Pakistan. See, this topic is in news because it is being widely reported in the media that the sudden improvement that we have noticed in the India-Pakistan relationship over the last 2 months is said to have been a result of such back-channel talks or back-channel diplomacy. Usually, during such back-channel talks, the key decision makers, such as the leaders of the respective countries, such as prime ministers, presidents, etc., they appoint their respective special envoys who meet with each other informally and in a covert manner away from the glare of the media and the public. These envoys then engage in free and open discussions on sensitive issues and topics, and they try to arrive at a conclusion which will help in the resolution of such issues. These back-channel talks always have great potential to succeed because they have the blessings of the highest levels of the leadership. This interview with Mr. Satinder Lamba helps us understand the importance of back-channel talks because he has had the experience of being the special envoy of former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, who had opened such back-channel talks with Pakistan, which reportedly lasted between 2005 and 2014. During this period, India-Pakistan back-channel talks were led by Satinder Lamba as India's special envoy, reporting on these delicate matters directly to the Prime Minister, and he was said to be interacting with the special envoy of Pakistani President Pervez Musharraf. Reportedly, through these talks, both the countries had achieved significant progress towards resolving several major issues in the India-Pakistan relationship, including the Siachen dispute, the Sir Creek dispute, the question of trade, the question of terrorism, and the mother of all disputes between India and Pakistan, that is the Kashmir dispute as well. Despite making considerable progress through these back-channel talks, the then Indian government couldn't turn these into agreements and deals because the talks were disrupted by major terror attacks such as the 26/11 attacks, which were carried out by Pakistan-based terror outfits with the active support of Pakistani state agencies such as the ISI. Currently, something similar appears to be underway between India and Pakistan because in the last 2 months, several remarkable developments have taken place. It all started with a joint announcement by the DGMOs of both the countries in February, where they upheld their commitment to strictly abide by the 2003 ceasefire agreement. This was followed by several positive statements by senior leaders of both the sides, and India even permitted Prime Minister Imran Khan's aircraft to have overflight access over India while traveling to Sri Lanka. Following this, meetings took place between the Indus Water Commissioners, and sports-related visas were being reissued by both the sides. Recently, Pakistan even proposed the allowing of Indian imports before withdrawing this policy, thereby triggering concerns and speculations. It is being reported that this ongoing improvement in the India-Pakistan relationship is a result of the back-channel talks that are going on between India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Pakistan's Army Chief General Bajwa. There are even unconfirmed reports about these back-channel talks being facilitated by a third-party mediator, that is the United Arab Emirates. But however, Satinder Lamba thinks that it's highly unlikely that India would have involved a third party if these back-channel talks are going on, because during his term, India preferred to hold direct bilateral talks with Pakistan, and most likely the same would have continued under the current government as well, because India generally hesitates to encourage any third party involvement or mediation in its ties with Pakistan. But the underlying point is that such back-channel talks between two hostile countries is very essential and useful because it allows for rational talks to take place on sensitive issues and topics away from the glare of the media and the public. Now, this is extremely important for the India-Pakistan relationship because in the last 4 to 5 years, relations between India and Pakistan have become extremely hostile due to Pakistan-sponsored terror attacks against India and as well as due to India's retaliation against these attacks in the form of surgical strikes and air strikes. Upon this, India's decisions related to Jammu and Kashmir and Article 370 led Pakistan to suspend and downgrade relations with India. And hence, at this juncture, such back-channel talks can help in reviving the relations and it can create the right grounds for normalizing the relationship. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question, critically evaluate the recent notification of the National Policy for Rare Diseases. The second question, racism will not be overcome with mere professions of good faith, but with strict anti-racist action. Analyze the statement. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. This concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.